That's it.
Well, that's a great segue because our next session, session 7, is how do we mobilize every member for ministry in our core? This really is the step where we turn that audience into an army. We breezed through maturity. You can go find a lot of resources on how to disciple your folks. But this is exciting because then once the purpose of maturity is for mission. We raise people up, but if we don't send them out, if we're a body, that means that we get really big heads and tiny little T-Rex arms. We want to make sure that people are heading out into the world and serving everyone. Every single member needs a ministry to the church and a mission to the world, which we're going to talk about next. If you want to hear something kind of depressing, an international survey discovered that only 10% of all church members around the world are active in any kind of service to their church. And then kind of even more depressing than that, they also found that 50% of those surveyed would never want to serve. They have no interest in serving in their church. But, and this is what this session is about, the exciting part for us is that 40% of the people in that survey said that they'd like to be involved, but they either had never been asked or they didn't know how. They'd never been asked or they didn't know how. And so we're going to be talking about how do we turn those participators, those spectators into participators, and those consumers, with the big heads into the contributors who are now using their hands and arms and feet to go out and serve the body. So how do we do that? Well, the first is we begin by teaching the biblical truth that God expects every member of his family to serve in a ministry. This is not for us. It's not for the leaders of the church only. It's not for a chosen few. We see in Romans 12 that there are 4 pillars of every member ministry, the first being that every believer is a minister. Kay likes to say that if you step across the line to become a Christian, you strap on an apron. Jesus said his ministry that on earth he came to serve and to give his life. So our ministry, when we are his followers, we are serving and giving. They're all part of just being a member of the body. In fact, the words servant and minister in the Bible are used interchangeably. It's part of just the definition of who we are as Christ followers. The second is every ministry is important. We know that we can't confuse, the Bible talks about this with our body parts, right? We can't confuse prominence with significance. That there's parts of my body that I don't see and don't think about, but if my heart or my, poor Dan, if my gallbladder had a problem, it'd be a problem, right? But if you cut my hair off, I'd probably be okay. So we can't, the most prominent ministries aren't necessarily the more important, and we need to help our members see that because they can more easily find their place that may not be something that they were expecting. Number 3, we are dependent on each other. Have you noticed this? God really likes us, likes dependence. He likes us to be dependent on him, but he also likes us to be dependent on each other. And so he hasn't given us all of the gifts. No one has all of the gifts. You may know people who think they have all of the gifts, but they don't have all of the gifts. And he did that intentionally because if you don't exercise your gifts, I get cheated. And if a member of your church is not exercising their gifts, your entire congregation is getting cheated out of the contribution they're supposed to be making to your church body. Number 4, ministry is how I express and enjoy the shape God gave me. So if you've been around Saddleback or Pastor Rick any amount of time, you know that we love acrostics. So all of these stand for an easy, memorizable way for your people to kind of unlock the different ways that God has created them to serve. And so the S in shape stands for spiritual gifts. Like we just talked about, nobody has all of the gifts, but every single person has at least one spiritual gift. And that spiritual gift is a piece of how God has shaped them uniquely to serve the body. H stands for heart. This is what do you love to do? What lights you up? There's stuff that you could probably do that you might be skilled at, but it just drains your battery. And there's other stuff that when you really get into it, you lose track of time. That's your heartbeat. I would say also this one is the stuff that kind of lights you up with this passion for this injustice. There's people in your church who are going to have a heartbeat for different injustices in the world, and that's a key into how they're supposed to serve the body. A stands for abilities. This one makes sense, right? You could have a heart for music, but that might not mean you have the ability to be on the worship team. So they go together. We need to have, these all start to help show people where to serve in your church. Abilities are cool. You may or may not know the average human has 400 to 600 abilities, but the problem is we haven't used them. We haven't exercised them. So we're going to talk a little bit later. Ministry is a way that we get to help our people maybe discover abilities that they didn't know that they have. I had a lot of interns, and I like to tell them that abilities are often like, these are your superpowers. It's the thing that is really easy for you that's really hard for other people. It's easy for you because it's part of the way that you're shaped. P is personality. Raise your hand if you're an early riser here. God bless you. I am not. Who's a night owl? That's me. We have introverts, we have extroverts, we have people who love routine, people who love variety. If you love routine, this program is killing you because you can't follow along, and I'm so sorry. Also worth mentioning, personality is going to affect how your shape is expressed. It's going to affect, you may have the same spiritual gift of evangelism, but you could be an introvert, and that's totally possible. And you're still going to, be able to use that shape and that gift, but it's going to be expressed differently. E is experiences. These are your good, your bad, your educational, vocational, but as Pastor Rick mentioned, also your painful experiences. We like to say, and it's so redemptive and so true, God never wastes a hurt. And often the areas of our deepest pain are the places that God uses for our greatest ministry. I feel like there's so many testimonies we could probably give to that. And to help our members really understand that truth, one is so hopeful for the people walking through those tough things, but it also, like grief share, like we talked about in some of these ministries we've already heard about today, who better to walk someone through something hard than someone who's already been through something hard, and God has designed us to serve the body in that way that we don't have to go through those things alone, and that he also redeems our pain in that ministry. There is an amazing free 6-week sermon series that you can take your church through this that will explain it to them. But then on the next page, you'll also see there's a class. We help explain this to our members through a ministry placement process in your church. This is just a really, an example of a pathway, but you explain the shape to your members in class 301. They take a little assessment to help them maybe think about these things in a way that they've never really maybe thought about their spiritual gifts, or they've never really thought about their personality and how those things go together. They commit to a ministry covenant, and then they meet with a guide who might walk them through this kind of verbally process, explain to them some options of ministry, and then choose a ministry, get serving, get some training. Number 3, after in how we're going to move people into ministry, this one's fun. Cut out unnecessary meetings. So we can be excited about that. No more meetings. We need some meetings. So your members have more time for ministry. We know Jesus didn't say, I came so that you may have meetings. He did say ministry. See, hopefully this is endearing. I'm being very authentic. Jesus didn't say, I came that you may have meetings. He said, I came that you may have life. And yet sometimes we act like the more meetings we attend, the more spiritual someone is. I'm there on Sunday morning, and then I'm going to my Bible study on Sunday afternoon and midweek, and then I have my committee meeting. And the problem is that we can fill up our members' schedules so full that they don't actually have time to do the work of meeting needs. We want to streamline our schedule to maximize ministry, the things that meet people's needs and actually do the work, and to minimize maintenance, the things that keep our organization running. Let's have fewer committees and just to be doing the work. And why do we do this? The most valuable thing people give us is their time. We want to be good stewards of our people's time. We can always make more money, but we can't make more time. So we need to be really, really mindful of that for folks. Number 4, a way that we do that is we provide on-the-job training like Jesus did. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there was no seminar the disciples had to go to before they became disciples. Their job of being a disciple was to follow around and kind of absorb as Jesus did it, and then kind of get kicked into doing it, off the deep end and doing it themselves. So this is an interesting thing to think about. You probably don't want the people who are really excited to sit in a class and learn to do a ministry for many, many weeks. Because what that means is that their shape is that they're really academic and they love learning, but they might not be the best people to be on the front lines of serving because they're shaped for academia. What we want is that Jesus' method of training was really simple and it was really relational. And how it worked is how a lot of actually serving professions, both then and now work, is it starts with I do it, and then I do it and you watch me, and then you do it and I supervise and watch you, and then you get to do it without me around, and now you're trained. And if we can take our members and trust them enough to give them on-the-job training, one, it says you can plant and grow many churches this way, but it cuts down on that meeting time, and it also immediately gets them into that joy, that unique feeling that we have when we're being used in our shape that's unlike anything else. The faster we get people into that feeling of, wow, I met someone's need. God used me. God used me in all the weird ways he made me, and only I could have met that need. If we can get them to feel that, the faster we can get them excited and actually used in ministry and not sitting and soaking and learning, the more we're going to get them in, get them excited, and keep them serving. Number 5, this is just a really great principle. Been burned by this one before. Never start a new ministry without a minister. A lot of folks are going to come to you and say, Pastor, we have this need. Don't you see this over here? Why aren't we meeting this need? And you say, well, thank you so much. I'm glad you identified that. But we're gonna start that ministry when the leader shows up. The most critical factor in the success of a new ministry startup is not the idea or the need, but who leads it. Because, like we talked about already, everything rises and falls on leadership. So we're going to trust God's timing to bring the leader, God's timing on meeting that need, and we're not going to force a ministry. God knows that need is there. He also knows the person. He already knows the person he's going to bring to lead that ministry, and we need to be patient. Most small churches especially try to do too much too soon. And what I've seen is that as a ministry leader, that also means that I end up doing it and I burn out. So you want to be really mindful that we never start a new ministry without a leader. But the cool thing is that number 6, we're going to allow anyone to start a ministry as long as 4 things are true. And this first one is that one I was talking about. We don't expect the pastor to run it. When that person comes up to you and says, Pastor, we have a need, or sometimes that's a nice way they say it, sometimes it's more like, why aren't we, or you're not doing, that criticizing thing. Next time someone comes up to you with a criticism, you can thank them and help them understand that they actually just are revealing their shape to you, that they're actually expressing that they have a heart for something that maybe someone else in their church hasn't seen yet. So yeah, right? So we can say, thank you so much. You're it. We call this the you're it principle at Saddleback. Thank you so much for identifying that need. You're right, we haven't been feeding the homeless, and you're the one who really cares about it. So you get to do it. You're it. You get to build this ministry. You get to find other people with that same heart. We'll equip you, but you're it. I don't know if even Pastor Rick remembers this. My mom is a great example of the you're it principle. We were, when I was a student, we were at Saddleback. We had just moved into the big new worship center. And if you've seen it, it kind of looks on the inside like a Costco or a Sam's Club. It's a little bit like a big industrial room, and there's intentionality to that, but she's an artist, and so with her artist eyes, she looked at it and said, this is really barren, we need art on the walls. And so she came to church leadership and said, we need an art ministry, we need to put art on the walls. And they said, great, you're it. So she didn't, she calls a meeting, people come out of the woodwork. She had the idea, but she didn't really know how to implement, something on like double this scale, huge, how do you build something that large? A sign painter comes from our church to this meeting and says, I'm not really an artist, but I know how to paint, do things on the scale of the side of a building. Would that be helpful? Yes, it would. Thank you so much. And people came out of the woodwork because someone said, you're it, and she got to start this ministry that wouldn't have started if it wasn't her shape and if someone hadn't equipped her to do it. They released her to do it, and I think even said, I think Pastor Rick said, "I'm not an artist, I don't get it, but if you see the vision, run with it," and she did. And so some of my key core growing up, memories of ministry were running around feeling like such a key part of my church because someone had empowered my mom to lead a ministry. And I think this is why one of many reasons why this session fires me up, because I've seen it take people who are kind of on the fringes of our church and make them core people in our church who are really invested because they have ownership, right? It's a lot harder to stay home and watch in your jammies the live stream or kind of church shop, between your favorite pastors on YouTube, if you're actually part of making this church thing happen, right? And that's a huge, huge need these days. So we love the You're It principle. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this idea of allowing anyone to start a ministry is that there's this dichotomy. You can have control or you can have growth, and you can't have both. So you either are going to be highly controlling and be super involved in every piece of every ministry that's happening, and again, maybe have some of that burnout happening, but you're not going to have growth. If you need to be at every meeting and know about everything that's going on, it's not going to be able to scale very large, right? But if you're willing to release it, if you're willing to have less control, a little more trust of your members, you can get a lot more growth because it can grow organically. But we always are managing that tension. You can have control or you can have growth, and you can't have both. Number two, has to be true if someone wants to start it. We can't go rogue. The ministry does not conflict with our church's strategy, values, or goals as we taught in our membership class that we just talked about. Kind of self-explanatory. Number three, the ministry will not harm the testimony of our church. We're not going to go do nude beach evangelism. That just doesn't make sense. Number four, the ministry doesn't do any fundraising. You can imagine of a church of any size, especially a church our size, if every single ministry was out there doing a bake sale and asking for their, ministry donations, we would drive all of our members and the community absolutely insane and not get anything done. The other reason why we don't want to allow people to do fundraising is because we can't have a unified church without a unified budget. Remember, everything that we're doing is on purpose, and so we're going to budget on purpose too. And so you can start your ministry if you don't have to do any fundraising. If you do need funds, you're going to run it through the leadership of our church. So number 7 on how we move people into ministry is that we allow people to quit or change ministries gracefully without guilt or pressure. I get it. I've been in this seat where the key person you think is so wonderful comes to you and says, I need to take a break or I need to step away, and we get nervous. I think in that nervousness, that scarcity mentality, we can kind of create this shameful thing, that how dare you leave my ministry? I was counting on you, But the reality is that creates an environment that doesn't allow people to explore. It doesn't allow people to discover their shape because they think, man, if I join this ministry, I'm stuck in this ministry till I die. That's not a very, again, that's a high control, not a very growth-filled idea. A ministry leader who's been serving junior hires forever, if they need to take a break, they should be sainted, not, shunned. We need to allow people to change and take a break gracefully. But I think my theory is that our kind of reluctance to do that comes from a scarcity mentality with God of, if that person leaves, who's gonna fill that spot in my ministry? But let me tell you, God already knows. And that gap can be good. We want people to see where they're needed. Oftentimes, people can't see that they could step up into that until that person actually leaves. My sweet fiance, when I met him, was leading, not just a part of leading 4 ministries in his tiny church, and I was like, that was a lot of ministries. And we had to have a conversation of, I know that it's hard, but if you step away and we watch this happen, God can call new people into new places, and maybe he wants to do something new with someone new that he can't do with that leader that we're so scared is going to leave. So we want to let people quit or change gracefully without guilt or pressure, because that's going to allow them to do the next three things. It's going to give people freedom to examine different ways of serving, freedom to experiment with different ministries in our church. People might not know that they have a gift with kids till they serve in kids, or they might get into kids ministry and decide they hate kids, and we don't want to keep them there. We want them to be able to change, right? I've heard some horror stories. We don't want people who don't like kids in kids ministry, and we want people to give people the freedom to exercise their God-given shape for ministry. Again, people have 400 or 600 abilities that they don't know until they try. I would not know that I have the gift of teaching if I hadn't have been able to test it out in smaller settings. Now, you might be disagreeing after this talk, and I hope not, but thank you, Pastor Rick, and thank you for, even my little small groups and different ministries for just allowing me to test it out and decide that this is something that maybe God has for me, and we want our members to be able to do that too. And it creates this environment of serving that's not an oppressive kind of structured environment, but it's something where people are getting to live out their shape. And there's so much joy when we see people come to find out new things and live out that unique way God has called them to serve. Number 8, we're going to delegate authority with responsibility. We must trust our people. We've talked about this a lot because the reality is you can't get people to trust your leadership until you trust them. We want to be activating, if we want to activate that audience into an army, we have to keep people motivated with ownership. We can't say, you're it principal ministry, but I'm going to micromanage every piece of it, and I'm going to kind of, maybe not that idea. I've seen that go wrong. I mean, how quickly can you stomp out the fire in someone's heart by micromanaging it? We need to give them ownership. We also need to give people responsibility. We've kind of talked about with covenants, people rise to the level that we're going to ask them to rise to. And also, people will be as creative as your structure allows them to be. We want that freedom. We want that freedom to explore and to also know that, as Pastor Rick has said in an earlier session, they can fail. They can fail fast, and they can fail cheap. That we're gonna let them explore. We're gonna let them discover new things. And what I've found in my ministry is when I do that, people figure out solutions to things that I would never figure out. I'm usually not the one closest to the problem. I'm usually not the one with the heartbeat for the thing that they've come to me about. And so if I give them ownership and I give them the responsibility, they might come up with something that I would have never thought of. They're also going to be internally motivated. I have an amazing social media volunteer right now who just kind of came out of the woodwork, and he loves this stuff. He's messaging me at all hours. He's thinking of new ways. He's building reels and things that I don't even know how to do. And I don't have to motivate Edward, because I didn't push him into leadership. I didn't have to call him. He's shaped for this, and he's so pumped to do it, so I let him run with it. I just give him good guide rails, but we just have this great thing going, and it's great because he gets to run it. Number 4, there are 3 ways that you bring out the best in your members. We give them a challenge, we give them control, and we give them credit. One final example just of this whole thing, when I was leading HIV and AIDS Initiative, there was an amazing member of our ministry, Bruce. Bruce used to be same-sex attracted, was living a gay lifestyle, contracted HIV, met the Lord, and just turned his whole life around, became this amazing follower of Jesus. And he was in our ministry, but had been very quiet about his story, but he was just this prayer warrior. And there was a time when our church was really trying to go after the idea of identity, help people struggling with any sort of conflict with identity, including kind of sexuality and all those things. And there was an interest meeting, and I was supposed to go, and I felt like, I'm the leader, and this is a touchy subject, so I really should be the one to be there, But for whatever reason, there was also this personal thing at the same night, and I was like, I really want to go to that thing, and maybe I'll bug Bruce, and I don't think he wants to, but, I'll see if Bruce will do it. So I call up Bruce. And I'll never forget, I was like, Bruce, I'm so sorry. Would you please lead this thing? I know it's outside your comfort zone, and you've never really admitted to anyone that this is your story. And he said, and this is why I'm telling the story. He goes, oh, Ashley, I'm so glad you called. I was just talking to the Lord last night, and he was telling me that I should get ready because there was a new way that I was going to be served, and I didn't know what it was. And I'm so excited. Thank you so much for trusting me with this. I can't wait to go to this meeting. And I had to take a step back and it was very humbling because I said, man, and my feeling like if it's to me to be, it's up to me. I have to do this ministry piece. I have to lead this thing. I would have robbed Bruce of the thing that God had already talked to him last night about, that he was so excited to do, and that he's going to relate to these people in such a stronger way than I ever could. And there are people sitting in your church, God's already talking to them. He's already shaped them before the creation of the world for the thing they're supposed to be doing. And if we feel like we've got to do it all and we're not releasing them to these things, we'll be robbing them of the thing that God's already whispering in their ear that they're supposed to do. So that's how we move people into ministry.